L'chaim, everybody. Tonight's class is sponsored by Mike. Thank you very much. Somebody stepped up for next week. I don't remember who.
They're shy.
Okay, we'll remember it later. But the week after next week, I'm not going to be in town. My wife and I are going to Israel for a visit to her family.
What date is that, if I may ask?
We're leaving on Thursday, February 29th. So that 1 week, the first week of March, we won't have a class, but then the next week, we're going to pick it up. Bezrat Hashem.
That's going to be what, the 7th? 6th.
The 6th will be the day that we don't have class. Right.
So the 28th?
28th we do. 28th next week we have a class. Then the 6th, no class. And then the 13th, class again.
Okay.
Mike, please. Give us something from the heart. There's a very compelling story that goes around in which there was a great rabbi who wasn't the biggest fan of irreligious Jews. And he came to visit the Rebbe, either in a private audience or perhaps later when he was giving dollars. And he presented the Rebbe with a question. He said, there's a statement in the Talmud that says, Afilu posh'ei Yisrael mile'im mitzvot kirimon. Even the sinners of Israel are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate is full of seeds. Said to the Rebbe, I don't understand. If they're posh'ei Yisrael, if they're true sinners, how could they be full of mitzvahs like seeds? So the Rebbe said, it's interesting. I also studied this piece of Talmud, and I also have a question. But I have the opposite question. If these people are full of mitzvahs like seeds, how could they be sinners? Sometimes it's all about how you ask the question that reveals your frame of reference. It reveals your perspective, it reveals how you see things, and also it will dictate the answer that you find. The way you ask a question is the way you will find the answer. And I believe that something very similar takes place in the section of chapter 2 of Tanya, which we're learning tonight. Because in the last class, in part 1 of this chapter, we presented the idea that every single Jew is a part of the divine. Chelek Eloka Mimal Mamash, literally a piece of God. And this week, as we study part 2 of this chapter, we begin the whole discussion with the opposite premise. The premise that Jewish souls are different. Jewish people are different, vastly different. Not just behaviorally, because that's the easy way to label Jews as different. This guy does more mitzvahs, this guy does less, this guy studies more, this guy studies less, this guy knows more, this guy knows less. When you get into it, it actually seems like essentially we're different. Some of us have been wired in different ways in terms of our relationship with God. It seems we actually have different levels of capacity as to the degree that we can experience that relationship. How much we'll be able to grasp and comprehend of Hashem, how much we'll be able to be in an emotional relationship with Him, how much we can feel Him. And it really does seem like a true, essential difference in gradations between Jews. The way the Alter Rebbe frames it is using the metaphor of a body. And I want to start by reading that portion inside. If you have the book, it's on page 48. And I kind of like the way he labeled it in English. He calls it section 2, are all souls equal? Like, that line from Animal Farm. All animals were created equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
So that's what it seems like. We're saying last week that all souls are created equal. We're all a piece of Hashem. But then when you look at it, it seems like some are more equal than others in the sense that we have different dispositions. 48. Says the Alter Rebbe. We're going to read the bold. And even though there are tens of thousands of different levels of souls, neshamos, one higher than the other to no end. That's the question. Tens of thousands, he says. There may even be as many different levels as there are Jews. Go to the next paragraph. He gives some examples, such as the superior quality of the souls of the patriarchs and of Moshe Rabbeinu. Peace unto them. Turning to page 49. Over the quality of the souls of these historically late generations depicted by the Talmud as the footsteps of Messiah. That's what we're called, like the heels is the literal translation. The term foot suggesting that these souls literally have the quality of feet compared to the souls of earlier generations which had the quality of the brain and head. So you put Judaism on a spectrum. You put us against the backdrop of all of history till the Exodus of Egypt, all the way back. It would seem like the Jews that lived in those times have a different type of soul. The relationship of a head to a foot in the body would be the relationship of their soul to our soul. And even if you zoom in, forget the whole macro level of Jewish history. Let's just zoom in to the current day and age, or any specific generation. What does he say in the next paragraph? The difference in quality of souls extends not only from one generation to another, but even within a single generation. And similarly, to use the Alter Rebbe's words, in every generation, there are leaders in Israel whose souls are like the brain and head, compared to the souls of the masses and ignorant people, which are lower. The head and the heel, he uses the word foot here, but the literal word akevayim is a reference to the heel, which is the bottom of the foot. Not just the foot, the bottom of the foot. And when you hear the metaphor of head versus heel, it's not just a technical metaphor, because you could easily translate it as, it's a head and heel thing. Head would be like a leader, heel would be a follower, right? The head decides where the body goes. The day the heel makes its own decisions is the day your body is in danger. The head needs to decide where the body goes, and the foot will follow. So one could say, that's what it means. Every generation has a head and has a foot. Every generation has leaders and has followers. And perhaps all of Jewish history has leaders and followers. Some of the greatest thinkers influence the way we think till today. They are the leaders, and then we are, the feet. We're just tagging along. But the truth is, as Kabbalah explains it, when we say head versus heel, we're talking about a qualitative difference in the nature of the soul. There are head souls and there are heel souls. Just like in the body, using the physical metaphor, your soul is more present in your head, which is the seat of your intelligence, and it's much less present in the feet. Godliness is more present in head souls and less present in the feet. Let me explain what I'm saying. In the Zohar, it says that Adam Harishon, Adam, when he was created, he didn't just have a soul. He had what's called a neshama klalit, a collective soul, a super soul. It contained within it sparks of all future souls that would emanate from him. And the way the Zohar words it is, every soul emanated from a specific body part or limb of Adam. This soul came from Adam's head. This soul came from Adam's foot. This soul came from Adam's torso. This soul came from Adam's toenails. From the top to the bottom. From the forehead, the nose, all kinds of things. The Zohar actually lists a whole series of body parts. Which means that if a soul can be traced back to the head of the first collective soul, or the foot of the first collective soul, that means that it's going to have a different capacity in its degree of feeling God. You're not just a head or a heel because of the nature of how you act, you're a head or a heel because of what kind of a soul you were born with. A brain soul, a head soul, will feel God more than a heel soul will. So when we say, or when the Alter Rebbe just said, that there's gradations, tens of thousands of levels, Moshe Rabbeinu would be the brain versus us would be the heels, we actually mean that. Their souls were different. They were in a different category. They experienced Hashem in a more tangible way, whereas we don't. We're like the foot. How much of the soul is present in the heel? The Chassidus always gives the metaphor. Try putting your heel in boiling hot water. It's not that hard. Try putting your head in boiling hot water. No, that's a challenge. Because your soul is more present in the head than it is in your heel.
Yeah. Can you change
Thicker skin, physically, yeah. So this becomes observable data. Like we can see this, we know this. Jews are different, not just in the way we act, but in the way we are, it would seem. The question is, how do we now phrase the question? Like the rabbi and the rebbe. Which premise do we adopt and which premise do we question? The simple way to ask the question would be, look, I'm going to work with what I see. I look around me, I see differences. I see levels. I see categories. And so, if we're so different, maybe we're not all that the same. Maybe what you told me last week needs to be questioned. Maybe we don't really all come from the same source. If we all came from the same one unchanging God, wouldn't you think it would manifest itself in a complete equality? God is beyond change and flux, so should we. If I look around and in my experience, I see so many different types of Jews, then maybe Chelek Elokam Imal Mamash is an exaggeration. Maybe we're not exactly, literally, a piece of God. But the other, deeper and probably truer way to ask the question is, if we're all the same, then how did we become so different? If we're all Chelek Elokam Imal Mamash, then how did we get here? How did we get to head souls and feet souls and hand souls and back souls and stomach souls? How did we achieve that? And it seems to me, the way I read the Tanya, that that's the Alter Rebbe's course. What he's going to explain is that you need to begin with the baseline of every single Jew is the same at the core level. Every single soul, every single Jew is equally rooted in what we called last week, Hashem's chokhmah, Hashem's wisdom, God's brain. What's missing is you have to understand the mechanism of how the differences got there in the first place. If you understand how the differences became, then you will actually reveal the secret of our sameness. By understanding the differences, you will understand truer and deeper what it means that every single Jew is equally a part of God. And for this, we move to probably the best metaphor for soul birth, childbirth. Childbirth, we actually hit on it a little bit last week when we were discussing the metaphors to describe what it means that every Jew is a piece of God. So we expressed that idea last week in terms of the semen's relationship to the father's brain. In the end of the day, the baby, the embryo, finds itself in the drop that the father releases. However, that drop of semen can be traced right back to the brain. And thank you to all the scientists last week, where the pituitary gland is, here or there, everywhere. We discovered that it's in the middle, it's at the base of the brain. But that was a very isolated part of the metaphor. Let's continue the thread. The father releases the semen. It came straight from his brain. And the semen develops into a child. The child, as it's born, like every human being, hundreds of body parts, trillions of cells, as we now know today more than ever, all functioning in harmony, beautifully in tandem, but vastly different. Look at ourselves. There's so many different categories, gradations, levels in our body. So the same question can be asked. Are we all the same, or are we different? How do the differences become? How did one drop of semen turn into such a complex organism? How does it jive with it all coming back to one source? And the answer is obvious. What's the answer? The answer is that something else happened between conception and birth. Between conception and birth, there was pregnancy. The period of gestation in the mother. Another person, another being, another entity was introduced. An incubation process happened, and that's what developed all the different limbs. In other words, whatever gradations you see should not be attributed to the semen, but instead should be attributed to the pregnancy, to the outside elements that it was subjected to. The mom's uterus developed this in different ways, to the point that this part of it became the fingers, this part of it became the toes, this part became the brain, this part became all the different cells as they, began to split open in the different ways that we observe today, are all attributable to that otherly force. But at their core, at the core of every single cell in the body, as many as there'll be at the atomic level, every single vein, sinew, limb, body part, you name it. What is it? What is the core of every single part of the child's body? The father's brain. Bottom line is, at the core level, at the DNA level, the head, as much as the toe, is a manifestation of the father's brain. A manifestation, to use more abstract wording, a manifestation of the father's identity. A continuation of the innermost essence of the parent. And the same, says the Alter Rebbe, using this metaphor, is the exact truth of the Jewish people. We were conceived together, unified, equal, fully the same in God's brain. We were birthed, entering this world, each with different wirings and capacities in terms of our spiritual abilities. But between the conception and the birth, our souls also went through a pregnancy. They also went through a gestation, through an incubation process. And that process is what allowed for lower and progressively lower souls, up to and including the soul of the most rebellious Jew. What the Alter Rebbe calls the Kal Shebakalim, the lightheaded of the lightheaded, which means, as the commentaries explain, the ones who the lightheaded consider lightheaded. It's like when the clowns in the circle of clowns, they go, "You're the clown." That's like, yes, you're the clown of the clowns. The Kal Shebakalim, the lightest of the light, even that Jew's soul. Not because of the core atomic godliness, but because of the pregnancy they were subjected to, became or allowed itself to become these different types of souls.
I think you would agree that Hashem has given each neshama, each soul, each person throughout all of eternity a specific task.
Yes.
We have things we have to learn, each one of us, different than the rest.
Of course.
So I'm calling it a degradation. I think maybe that's not the best word. Maybe the word is that test.
Okay.
And then it would make sense, more sense anyways to me, that people like Moshe, Avram, they had their neshimot were possibly viewed as more elevated. And those of us now, those of us who are considered heel or the foot, have a greater test.
So first, just a technical thing. I didn't use the word degradation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was just gradation, as in grades.
My word.
Because I do not want to imply chas v'shalom that it's.
Sorry.
No, I'm saying it's certainly not a lower. It's not a degradation in the sense of bad or good. To your point, though, as to whether each soul is tasked with a specific task, and that's the one that's fit for it, and in some ways we're greater than the head souls, that's absolutely true. What we're talking about in the Tanya, though, is the capacity to godly experience. And you would have to agree that some Jews just don't have that capacity as much as other Jews.
Not embraced it, maybe? Maybe we all have capacity, but the question is, have we chosen by our free will to embrace it?
I don't think so. I think we each have a capacity that we need to reach, like Mark was saying, but that the capacity is equal amongst everyone. I think that's why we have tzaddiks and beinonis. That tzaddik is clearly more in tune with Hashem. He feels God, versus a regular guy who cannot feel it to that level. We have to embrace our calling, and in some ways we can give the tzaddik that which he doesn't have, and that's where I'll come on the same page with you. Is that everyone, because they're tasked with a certain mission, can and must do what they have to do. But I think in terms of sensitivity, divine sensitivity, and that's what he's addressing over here, is the level to which people are divinely sensitive. There are differences in souls.
Just an observation that everything comes from the lowliness. Like we were talking about the souls, we're now the generation of Akef or the
Yes.
Heel.
Yes.
Only this generation could bring about Mashiach.
Like Jeff was saying, that the lowest sometimes souls have the task that the biggest guys couldn't do.
And after the Tzava, the Rebbe said,
Yes,
the feet is what brings the roach to head.
That's right.
Where it is.
That's right.
Without the feet, it couldn't go to where it is either.
Absolutely.
So we are the generation of the lowliness. However, we seem so pretty important now. all of a sudden.
Absolutely, we do. And it's important. I'm going to tell you the same thing that I said to Jeff. It's an important distinction. The Tanya is only concerned with the level of the sensitivity to the divine. And in that, we are for sure lower. Whether our actions can accomplish greater things, there's no doubt about that. Certainly true in a different context. Here we're speaking about in terms of the nefesh coming from Hashem. How do we explain the gradations in divine consciousness? That's what we're occupied with tonight.
If we have these limitations,
Yes.
then what, and then those limitations affect how the decisions we're going to make and what we do. So some of it is out of our control.
Ties into what Jeff said. Ties into what Jeff said.
Is anything in our control?
Well, we have
I don't want
free
to.
will.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's not go there. This is not a theology class, but just to bottom line your question, and it's edges on this earlier conversation. We're only concerned now with the ability to sense the divine, but the ability to act as a Jew, every Jew has equal potential for that. To do the mitzvahs, bottom line it.
Okay.
That's
the distinction.
that's where free will is. There may not be free will into what level you could understand about Hashem. You may be able to understand more,
But the
than
act
the other
of
guy.
doing
But
tefillin or
yes, the
every
tefillin,
Jew
the
can
matzah,
do that.
every Jew can do it, and every Jew must.
No matter what.
I don't care who you are, how simple or how sophisticated you are.
Yes,
So the souls have a gestation. The gestation has a name. The name is a Kabbalistic word that's going to come up repeatedly in the Tanya, and that's hishtalshalus. Hishtalshalus. Hishtalshalus literally means the chain, or the chain reaction. Essentially, in order to get from God's innermost essence to the lowest level of reality as we observe it, this physical world, you can't just come straight. There needs to be a series of gradual reductions, compressions, concealment to godly divine energy in order to allow for a reality that not only won't see godliness, but can actually deny it. Generally, Hishtalshalus is divided into 4 distinct worlds. I like to call them 4 distinct states of consciousness. We use the word world like you would use the word about a friend. He's always in his own world. That context. His own world means he sees things in that perspective, and that's where he operates. So generally speaking, we have 4 states of divine consciousness. Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. The world of emanation, the world of creation, formation, and action. And they're going to be explored at length in chapter 39. That's quite a while away from here. Ooh. But basically, in short, it's the level to which godliness is real to you. In the world of Atzilut, I'm just giving you really tagline stuff. In the world of Atzilut, godliness is natural. Like a baby is born, it doesn't need to be taught to breathe. It just breathes because breathing is natural to it. Godliness is natural to Atzilut souls. In Atzilut, the state of consciousness is God is just part of who I am because that's how it is. In Bria, you go a stage lower, and your relationship with God is achieved through intellect, through the mind. And like the mind has the power to reach objective truth, even if we don't like the conclusions that our mind draws. Sometimes we're driven emotionally to think certain ways, but when you divorce your emotion from the thought process, you need to sometimes embrace ideas that may be opposite to your thinking, because that's what the power of intellect is. It can reach objective truth. So it's possible for a soul in Bria to fully reach an objective, truthful relationship with Hashem, not in a way of natural, it will be superimposed, but it can be reached through the intellect. Yetzirah, the world of formation, is the next world down. That's the world that operates on emotionality. So your relationship with God will only be measured to your instincts. You cannot necessarily reach an objective, true understanding of Hashem. It's limited to the inner wiring, let's call it, of the neshama. And then the world of action is even less. It's super hard. These souls will have their hearts blocked and their minds not so developed, in the sense that the potential isn't that great, but they have the power, on the flip side, to compensate with action. They have a sincerity about them in which they do what they're supposed to do at any cost, where, let's call it the intelligentsia, right? The guy who thinks he's the big versteher or understander is going to come up with this and that, and it's complicated and it's sophisticated. This is the sincere guy. They just do what they have to do. They don't ask too many questions. But at any rate, it's different things. And there's myriads of levels within these levels, but I'm just giving you a general picture. So the idea of the pregnancy is that as the souls descend through this chain reaction, in other words, as they're exposed to lesser and lesser degrees of divine consciousness, different souls retain the character of different worlds. They all end up in this world. Every soul is birthed into a body in the physical experience. However, they come in holding on to differing levels of divine consciousness that they were exposed to. That's why we're taught in the Zohar that there are what's called nishamot da'atzilut. Certain souls, certain tzaddikim, certain righteous people are walking, talking manifestations of the world of emanation. To them, and when you look at them, you can see it, they breathe godliness. That's just who they are. It's natural to them. There is no other way with it for them. Some souls are lesser, and some souls, like many of us, are like the action souls. We don't have that much smarts or that much emotional sensitivity. It's a more, I guess the way you would say, that the further your soul got from the truth, the more diluted its godly experience will be. But that's all a product of the pregnancy. That's all a product of the elements. You were exposed to the elements. Your soul was exposed to the elements. And therefore brought upon you these different or varying soul characteristics. But in essence, like in the body of a child, at the DNA level, every part of the child is the father's brain. Every single soul, every single Jew is Chachma Ila'ah, supernal wisdom, God's brain. Eli asked me before the class if the divine soul is what we know in Yiddish literature as the Pintele Yid, the point within the Jew. And I said to you that yes, but it's going to be even more accentuated tonight. This idea is what's called the Pintele Yid. The fact that at every Jew's core, the Pintele Yid literally means the dot of the Jew. It's like the innermost point. At the innermost, deepest level, we are wired to be a part of God. And it's why, as we're going to see in chapter 18, another cliffhanger, why every Jew, when push comes to shove, will give his life for God. Because even if the other parts aren't so developed, the heart may not be so developed, the brain may not be so developed, but we're just a heel. We don't feel it. We're thick-skinned and blocked up and clogged. Don't matter. Don't matter. At the atomic level, every single Jew is equally part of Hashem's brain. But we're going to go a little deeper as the closing point of the class. sometimes it's great to know the truth or to say the way the truth is, but you don't see it manifest. So it's hard to fully believe it and to feel it. So we can say, and use the child as the metaphor, that every part of it can be traced back to the Father at the DNA level. Every single thing is the Father's brain. Every single Jew is God's brain. But is there a way, or do we ever get to see it in a more tangible way? Or do we have to suffice with, that's the truth and that's what it is? So the Alter Rebbe says, if we take a closer look at the child, we can actually see the connection to the brain revealed. And that is, first again, we'll start with the physical. A child is born, he has the full spectrum, the full gamut of faculties. He can be everything that the previous generation was. And every solitary element of his existence depends on its brain. In other words, in the fact that the responsibility of the brain has carried over to the child, you see how every single part of the child is in its core brain, conceptually speaking. Because look, even as the father transferred his identity to the child, every part of that child needs a brain to lead it. Even the toenails. As a matter of fact, in Kabbalah, there's some reference of the connection between the toenails and the brain. People don't know this, but it says in the Midrash or the Zohar that before Adam sinned, his entire skin was not skin as we know it; it was nail material. Yeah. The original intention was that our entire bodies should be covered with this very resilient material that makes up our nails. And then because of the sin, it was just reduced to the edges of the fingers and the toes. Yeah. Much better?
For you, especially.
Well, there'll be no mani-pedi because it's covered, both ways. But the Zohar says that the tzipornayim, the idea of nail, is related to the moach, to the brain. So in the child, there's a manifestation of the idea that everything is the brain because everything needs the brain. And so too, says the Alter Rebbe, in the Jewish people. Once we've all been birthed, the Jewish people as a whole are a complete child. They have all the parts. And in order to sustain our relationship with God, we also have to rely on our brain. In every generation, there's one Jew who is the head of the generation. When a Jew is connected as the body part with the head, they actually get energy to serve God. Because the tzaddik, the leader, the head soul of the generation, like the brain, feels God most acutely. Godliness is present and clear in his life and super apparent. And so he can become the feeding tube for everybody else in the generation. We're going to see this more in detail next class, along with an even bigger bombshell that I don't want to give away now. Next week. The takeaway, though, in the bottom line, is that any differences we observe came from somewhere else. It didn't come from our core. At our core, we're chilek elokam mimal mamish. Every single one of us is equally a part of the divine. And while we study it, in the abstract or in the concept, it needs to carry down also into our practical view of other Jews. The easiest thing to do is to categorize. The easiest thing to do is to label. This guy's Orthodox, this guy's ultra-Orthodox, this guy's less Orthodox. Oh, there's a great line. The word for religious is frum, right? F-R-U-M. So you are in the middle. Anybody to the left of you is modern, Anybody to the right of you is religious fanatic. You know, the F and the R. Fanatically religious. And you're just perfect. You know, you're just the right dosage of everything you need. But the truth is that we need to stop with the categorization. Labels are for clothes, not for people. Every single person, every single Jew is essentially the same. By the way, you want to know? You want to know how I know? Ask our enemies. That's the easiest way to know. They don't differentiate.
Yeah, they don't.
They didn't differentiate in the last generation. They didn't differentiate on October 7th. That's,
All the same.
but we don't need to come on to that. Okay, we shouldn't need the negative. We should know it from the inside out. We should acknowledge it because it's the truth. Yes, there are differences. That we're not going to ignore them, but they're superimposed.
Yeah.
They're not essential. I just read a story where there was a soldier who was in the Givati brigade in the 50s, when there was nobody religious. There was 3,000 soldiers, and he was one of 12 observant Jews. And a whole thing, I'm not going to get into the details now, but bottom line is he brought Shabbat to the whole brigade. First to a little group of people, and then the general asked him to come into the dining room and do it for everybody. And he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, asking him for a blessing, that all the religious soldiers should be able to progress and grow and keep their observance even in the army. So the Rebbe wrote back to him, please give my blessing to every soldier, not just to every religious soldier, as you call them, because it's time to stop categorizing it. And the guy, when he told the story, you see it in the Gem videos in the encounter where he says he's like, see, in the Rebbe's view, there wasn't 12 religious soldiers in a 3,000 soldier brigade. There was 3,000 religious soldiers who just didn't know that they were religious. You understand? In other words, as the Frierdiker Rebbe was wont to say always, the Rebbe's father-in-law would always say, every Jew is not able and doesn't want to be separated from godliness. At the core, we are in tune with our godliness. Yes, there's other things that come onto us and pile on, and not just our own, but we have generational stuff piling up upon us which hides and conceals the godliness. But in the end, like Mike said before the class actually, some earlier generations, they may not have had it, but in the end it comes out. In the end, we are the same. In the end, we truly are Chilek Elokam Imal Mamash, a part of the living God above, literally. L'chaim.